In this video, we're going to talk about expected value and how to calculate expected value given any probability model. Now, the thing I like to go back to when I think of expected value, the basic example I could show anybody is I want you to think back to maybe your middle school English class or maybe a high school social studies class where you were kind of on the brink between a C and a B or on the brink between a B and an A. And I feel like we've all been there before where we've kind of done this calculation in our head or usually not in our head. We actually have to write it out on paper and says, okay, well, if I know my final exam's 20% of my final grade and I want to get an A for the class, well, then I can get as low as a 78. If you get as low as a 78, you're in pretty good shape. Let's use a more practical number. I have to get an 85 on this final in order for me to get an A in this class. Now, if you've been in that situation before, you've had that conversation with yourself before, what you're doing is you're creating an expected value in your head and you haven't even realized it. You're trying to figure out, okay, what's the minimum value I get on a certain component of my grade or a certain component of this expected value in order for me to get what I want. Okay, so I'm going to use that classroom example as a way to explain this. So let's say in your Stat 115 class, and this is not the actual grade breakdown, I believe, for my class. But let's just say you're graded on. We're going to do three basic categories. We're going to say your final exam, and we'll say that final exam is worth 25% of your grade. Okay, we'll say your midterm exam, and we'll say that's 20% of your final grade. And then everything else we'll just say are assignments, okay, to keep it general. And that's your homeworks, maybe your quizzes, any projects that you might do in class, and that's left over, and that's going to count for 55% of your grade. Okay, so leading up to the final exam, let's say I have my grades over here. And again, my goal is I want to try, obviously, to get an A in this class. So I'm not sure what my final exam is going to be just yet. My midterm exam, let's say I did well on that. Let's say I got a 95. And then for my classroom assignments, I've got an average of an 80, okay, when it all is said and done. And I want to figure out, okay, what do I need to get on my final exam to get an A for the course? And when we say an A, we'll just say it's equal to 90%. I'm going to put a little. Okay, that's where we want to be. That's our sun. That's our beacon of light. I want to be at a 90%. So how do I get to that 90%? Okay. Well, for expected value, I'm going to give you the equation for it first, and then we'll see if we can kind of use this to build that equation. It's equal to the probability of x1 times x1 plus the probability of x2 times x2, and then it's for every succeeding event, and you finish up with the probability of xn times xn. Okay. I also like to call this part of the equation, all right, where we see this probability. Instead of thinking of it as the probability of it going to happen, maybe more like the weight. Okay, in this case, when we talk about something like a course grade, it's not the probability that I'm going to get an assignment. It's the weight of that assignment being 55%. Okay, so the expected value in the class, how this works out. If you're like me and I see these symbols, I need to see it in an equation with numbers for it to make sense. So the expected value for my class, or we'll say the course grade, is going to be equal to, now I only have three components up here. I have the final exam, the midterm exam, and the assignments. Okay, so the midterm exam I got 20%. So the probability, I'm going to translate that to 20%. And then times, when we think of x1, x2, or xn, that is the raw value of that event. Okay, so for the midterm exam, it would have been 95. So 95, let's say 95 out of 100. Okay, that's the midterm component. The assignment component I have is 55, and it's going to multiply by our course grade, which was 80. Okay, and then the last component is our midterm, or I'm sorry, our final exam, right? It's 25%, but I haven't gotten a score on that just yet. Okay, here's what I'm going to do for the time being. Okay, I'm going to say hypothetically, I want to do a guess and check, and let's just say because I got a 95 on the midterm, I want to see what grade I would get with a 95 on the final. Let's say I'm a creature of habit, and if I got a 95 on the midterm, I want to get a 95 on the final. All right, and we're going to use that kind of like as a guess and check for now. Okay, and if I finish this equation off, or if I do the math on this, we'll figure out what my course grade is. So you simply take the probability, and here's the key with expected value: it's the probability times the raw number. In fact, I'm going to write that up here at the top in case we forget. Okay, it's equal to the probability times the raw number. Okay, and if you can do that for each component in a probability model and then add them up, that's your expected value. Okay, so we'll take a minute here to do this. So we're going to do 0.2 times 95, and I get 19 as that first component. For the assignment component, we're going to do 0.55 times 80, and that gives me 44. And then for the last one, again, we're going to guess with the 95. So 0.25 times 95, and that gives me 23.75. And if I add these all up, this will give me what my course grade would be if I were to score 95 on the final. So 23.75 plus 44 plus 19, it gives me an 86.75. Oh man. What that tells me is I'm going to have to really do well on that exam in order to get an A for the course. It might not be possible actually. Okay, so this is what I would get if I get a 95. Let's try it again. All right, or let's try and actually answer the question of what would that final score have to be. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite this equation down here. All right, and right now in this equation, as I go left to right, course grade equals 0.2 times 95 plus 0.55 times, so on and so forth. The unknown here is my course grade. I'm going to change that to a known. Okay, so we're going to say my course grade is a 90. Okay, nothing else changes, but now the unknown will go with my final exam. So 20% of my midterm, 95, plus 0.55 times 80, right? That hasn't changed. My course assignments, the weight of my final isn't going to change. That's 25%. But now I'm going to put my X value here. Okay, I want to figure out what score I got to get on the final to get ultimately a 90. Okay, so we're going to solve this equation. 90 equals, and we have these calculations already up top. 20% of 95 was 19. 55% of 80 was 44. And then we're going to use this 0.25 times X. All right, so we'll get, again, we want to solve this, so 90 is equal to 19 plus 44. It's going to give me 63 plus 0.25x. Subtract the 63 from both sides. These will cancel, and we get 27 is equal to 0.25 times x divided by 0.25 divided by 0.25. These will cancel. And again, we're going to do 27 divided by 0.25, and I get 108. Uh-oh. All right, initially we're thinking, uh-oh, something's wrong here. But that's right. This is what I have to score a 108 on the final to get an A. Okay, so that tells me one of two things. One, I'm going to have to really study for that final. And then number two, I might want to talk to my professor to see if I can make up some of those assignments. That's expected value.